Greetings, and thank you for joining the Capstone Group for this important Zoom event. Before we get to our main presentation, a bit about the Capstone Group. We were founded in August of 2018, inspired by the Howard University student protests that took place earlier that year. We are a dynamic collaborative of Howard University alumni, faculty, students, staff, and community that proactively address issues relevant to the Howard University community. We provide an empowering platform to exchange ideas and experiences to affect positive change. Now, sit back and enjoy the presentation, and remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
I'd like to thank everyone for joining this Zoom call, and let's meet our featured guests for the evening. Starting with Erica England, a senior at Howard University and the head of the Afro-Socialist chapter of Howard Young Democratic Socialists of America. She began a political journey as a student activist at Howard while interning for the progressive nonprofit Our Revolution. She became a student ambassador for DC statehood, fighting for equal voting rights in the District of Columbia, which I appreciate because I'm a native Washingtonian. She then joined the Bernie 2020 presidential campaign in 2019 as an operations manager for the national office. She currently serves as a national organizer for Unemployed Workers United and manager of production and community engagement for the Hello Somebody podcast with Senator Nina Turner. Our next guest is Sasanya Jones, EBD. Dr. Sasanya Jones is an associate professor in the Higher Education Leadership and Policy Studies program at Howard University. She teaches courses on governance, policy, and qualitative research. Specifically, her research interests focus on the nexus between policy and practice for diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. And our last featured presenter and fellow Capstone board member is Rayna Coxon, MED. Rayna Coxon knew in the 4th grade she was going to an HBCU. Rayna graduated from Howard in 1999, where she majored in English and minored in radio, television, and film. School of C. She also graduated from the School of Education in 2003 and the School of Divinity in 2015. As a proud Howard alum, she is valued being a member of the Capstone Group. She thanks the Capstone Group for another opportunity to engage this evening. I'm going to turn it over to Rayna.
Good evening. We have our distinguished guest, who is Erica England. She was one of the leaders of #Blackburn Takeover. The takeover took place in October 12th, 2021. It was a historic takeover, number one, because of where they were taking over, but number two, because of how many days they took it over. And they had 3 demands. They wanted an in-person town hall with President Frederick and the administration. They demanded to reinstate all affiliate trustees on the boards for students, faculty, and alumni with voting power. And they were also proposing a meeting with President and the chairman of the board with student leaders outlining a housing plan to protect incoming classes for Howard's immediate future. So without further ado, here is Erica England.
Thank you, Ms. Rayna. So during the Blackburn Takeover, I don't think we initially realized the gravity of what we were standing in. Students just knew that they were tired of dealing with many of the issues that people on this call had dealt with when they were at Howard. And we knew it wasn't right, and we knew it wasn't fair, especially because we'd been through so much during COVID and being away from campus for so long. We thought that returning to campus, while we knew there'd be some difficulties or some challenges, we didn't realize that some of the things that we were facing were ingrained in Howard for a long time. So we took over Blackburn. We took over Blackburn with the hopes that we'd get the attention of the administration and that we could all come together and work out these issues and negotiate on these issues and figure this out as a Howard community. Many of you know it didn't exactly go quite that way. But we don't have any regrets. It was needed. It was time, especially because there had been a protest previously, just in 2018. And we were dealing with some of the same issues that those students were dealing with just a few years ago. So we took that time to educate ourselves as well on the history of Howard and of HBCUs themselves. We know that we did the right thing just by shining a light on the inequities that we were facing as students, and the amount of love and support that the Howard community gave us back, that other people in the DC community and across the country and even across the world, there were people that were calling in, that were showing support, showing love, donating to us. And we knew that we did the right thing. So moving forward, even though I can't speak on exactly what was in the memorandum of understanding, the students that were protesting are going to ensure that Howard's administration is held accountable to the students and to the broader Howard community with what was agreed upon in our memorandum of understanding. That being said, the students of Blackburn, we're still organizing. We are still engaged in student advocacy and student work. We are continuing to advocate for ourselves and for other students to make sure that we, as Black students, as HBCU students, as Howard students, are given everything that we need to thrive and grow and to learn. So while 33 days inside of Blackburn did bring attention to what we're facing as students, that is not nearly enough time to go over everything that Howard has been facing for decades. So we are going to continue this work, and we are going to continue to make Howard the best HBCU in the country. Thank you.
And next, we are going to watch a short video giving us a brief history of HBCUs.
The first Black Supreme Court Justice, Surgeon General, and Vice President of the United States have more in common than making history. They all attended an HBCU. An HBCU is any historically Black college or university established before 1964. The principal mission of the schools was and is to educate Black Americans at a time when access to higher education was inaccessible for most. Even though historically Black colleges and universities represent 3% of all colleges and universities, they produce 20% of all Black college graduates in the United States. Today, there are 101 HBCUs located in 19 states, Washington, D.C., and the U.S. Virgin Islands. 70% of Black dentists and physicians, 80% of Black judges, and 25% of all Black STEM degree holders earn degrees from HBCUs. HBCUs have always been open to students of all races, and they've gotten more diverse in recent years, with non-Black students making up 24% of HBCU enrollment in 2018. While some HBCUs are thriving, many are facing hardships. Rising college costs, federal budget cuts, and the student loan crisis are deeply affecting HBCUs, where most students are low-income and first-generation college students. Since 1997, 15 HBCUs have had to close their doors. In 2019, Morehouse College, an all-male HBCU in Atlanta, made history when billionaire Robert F. Smith announced he would pay off the graduating class's student loans. The Biden administration has promised to pledge $70 billion towards HBCU funding.
Next, we're going to have a more in-depth discussion on the history of HBCUs with Dr. Susanya Jones, and she is from the Howard University School of Education.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. Some of what I said will be a repeat of what you just heard, but some of it will be an expansion. Historically, Black colleges and universities, or what I'll refer to as HBCUs, are distinctly different from other minority serving institutions, or commonly known as MSIs, and historically white institutions in their history, their mission, and the populations that they serve. As the video said, the federal government defines HBCUs as any historical Black college or university that was established prior to 1964, whose principal mission and is the education of Black Americans. So there's a distinct and explicit mission. Now, it's important to note that Black Americans have always sought out education in informal and formal ways before, during, and after slavery, something that we aren't often taught. But it wasn't until the Congressional Moral McComas Act of 1890, commonly referred to as the Second Morrill Act, that the federal government made provisions for the establishment of Black land-grant universities in 17 southern states. Now, you also need to know, while the federal government established these land-grant universities, it was largely to make sure that Black Americans did not seek or push to attend white universities. And the lack of enforcement for nearly a decade saw only 4 states provide the necessary financial support via tax funds to implement the law. And so for a long, long time, HBCUs have been sorely underfunded and disenfranchised. But land-grant universities are not the only HBCUs. At the same time that many public land-grant HBCUs were established, many churches and private donors sought to establish private HBCUs. Private HBCUs offered an attractive alternative for Black Americans post-slavery because they were more likely to offer collegiate level instruction, whereas many land-grant universities sought to become technical training institutes that were not offering liberal arts level curriculum. And so for nearly 80 years following the establishment of Black American higher education institutions, a disproportionate number of Black Americans actually attended private liberal arts HBCUs. It took nearly a century for HBCUs to receive their federal designation in 1965 with the passage of the Higher Education Act, and it would take almost another 31 years before additional clauses were added to the Higher Education Act because of the chronic underfunding to support HBCUs. And largely, this was a little too late. And we are still trying to catch up because of the systematic disenfranchised by state and federal government towards funding HBCUs. As the video cited, although HBCUs are chronically underfunded, they're outperforming predominantly white institutions when it comes to educating Black Americans. Although they only represent 3% of institutions across the country, they graduate nearly 20% of all Black Americans. And HBCUs also represent 9 of the top 10 schools to graduate Black students who pursue and earn doctoral degrees. And people are still trying to figure out what's in the sauce. And what we know from the research is that the environment and culture of HBCUs are key factors to their success. They improve self-confidence, self-efficacy, and learning through culturally affirming and responsible ways that other institutions cannot. So the accomplishments of HBCUs are very much connected to our history and the mission to educate and uplift Black students in the Black community.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. I learned some interesting information. I currently work at a land-grant institution and did not know that fact, the real reason behind the land grant. So that was good information. So thank you. So next I will be continuing the discussion and talking about some trends in higher education and just how we've seen sort of this resurgence of HBCUs in recent years. And so I started to look at those trends and then wanted to know what events are leading to the resurgence of HBCUs. So in recent years, HBCUs have seen a resurgence in athletics, donations, research, politics, and the like. And the resurgence could be probably attributed to a number of factors and influences, but mainly these are some of the events that I think kind of pushed the HBCUs forward. So in November of 2015, the University of Missouri had protests. So leading up to the protests in 2015, Black students were impacted by a number of racist events at Mizzou, which is a predominantly white institution. And these acts, and I'm going to give a warning, some of these are kind of disturbing, included cotton balls being scattered outside the Black Cultural Center by 2 white students in 2010. It included the killing of unarmed Black teenager Michael Brown by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, and this is about 120 miles away from the institution, which is in Columbia, Missouri, and that was in 2014. It also included a swastika drawn on a wall of a residence hall using feces, and that was in October of 2014. So these events, among other just sort of outrageous events, led to a student boycott supporting Jonathan Butler, who was an African-American graduate student who decided that he would go on a hunger strike until the president of the university, Tim Wolfe, resigned. So Wolfe's response to the ongoing racial incidents were largely seen as inadequate. However, Butler's hunger strike, which began on November 2nd, 2015, received this national media coverage. So the Mizzou football team, Black and white players alike, the coaches joined in the protest, as well as students from institutions across the nation. And this resulted on November 9th in the resignation of the president, Tim Wolfe. And right after that, the chancellor of the university also resigned. Now, in September 2016, Dr. Walter Kimbrough, he's the president of Dillard University, an HBCU in New Orleans, he wrote an article in the Washington Post and attributed these enrollment jumps in several HBCUs, including Tuskegee, Virginia State, Delaware State, up to a 49% enrollment jump, what he attributed to the Missouri effect. And so this was attributed to those protests that took place at Mizzou a year earlier. And there were record numbers of freshman classes were welcomed at Claflin University and also at Harris Stowe State University in St. Louis, which is about 10 miles from Ferguson, Missouri. Students ultimately decided that HBCUs were safe spaces for them to learn at, and there was a best fit for them. Another event that I think really kind of led to HBCUs, this is kind of my own thinking, is Black Panther. So Black Panther was released on February 16th, 2018. Of course, it's an American superhero. The film had like a $200 million budget. Black Panther grossed like $1.348 billion worldwide, highest grossing film by Black filmmaker Ryan Coogler. And so the film starred the late Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa, Black Panther, and Boseman, as we know, he's also a graduate of Howard University. So in an interview with Nightline, Howard University as an HBCU was likened to Wakanda as like a Black utopia, to which Boseman responded, and I quote, "The Howard experience is one where you see the diversity of Blackness. From people from Caribbean, people from many different countries in Africa, you see the differences in people within the States, you have classmates from London and France, you have everything possible in this experience." And so as Black Panther continued to break those box office records, the United Negro College Fund urged start giving to HBCUs. And Dr. Rosalind Clark Artist, she's the first woman president of Benedict College in Columbia, South Carolina. She penned an article for UNCF making the statement, "The search for Wakanda begins with an investment in HBCUs." And she again likened HBCUs to our version of Wakanda. They are places where creativity is celebrated, technology is developed by people of color. They are places of a great pride where Black people are not excluded or ostracized, but embraced and celebrated. Another event that I think led to HBCU's resurgence is when Beyonce headlined Coachella. This was April 14th and April 21, 2018. And then Netflix, there was a documentary that she directed. Okay, she was in it and she directed it. That was released a year later, April 17th, 2019, and that was Homecoming. And Beyonce's mother, Tina Lawson, she initially had reservations about the show because she was worried that a largely white audience of Coachella wouldn't really understand a show that was so steeped in Black culture, let alone Black college culture. And so Lawson remembered Beyonce's reply saying that, you know, she's been given this platform that she had achieved in her career, and she felt that she had a responsibility to the world and do what's best for the world and not just do what's popular. So her performance paid tribute to the culture of HBCUs, featuring a full marching band, majorette dancers, also incorporated some Black Greeks, a step show. The band members did a lot of songs that we recognize, Swag Surf, which I kind of think Howard University single-handedly brought back. Backed that thing up, had it gospel, had go-go. And I have to say, when I watched Homecoming, I was so like emotional. Like I was surprised at how emotional I was, because it really was like a homecoming for me, because it was bringing me back to need something near and dear to my culture. And then it, you know, the band, you know, we've y'all been in the band, shout out Maria Jones. You know, it had little school days kind of swag in it. And then what really got me is when she stops and then starts to sing, lift every voice and sing. Now, you know, if you've been to an HBCU, that's like the jam, right? So anyways, but Beyonce doesn't end it there. She also has a scholarship fund. And within that scholarship fund, she selected 8 students from 8 universities: Texas Southern, Morehouse, Fisk, Grambling, Xavier, Wilberforce, Tuskegee, Bethune-Cookman. So she's a donor as well. Other donors, as we saw in the video, Robert Smith, he made a pledge to pay off the debt for 400 Morehouse graduates in the class of 2019, like the whole class. Like this was worldwide global news. This man, billionaire, and he paid up. He stuck to his word. He spent $34 million in paying off their student loan debt. And then after that, do you know he came back and said the parents and the guardians of these students who got debt too? Because you know how it is when you go to college, you got the debt, your family got the debt, everybody got the debt. He said, I'm paying off all y'all debt. So everybody debt paid. So that's another thing. So I really think that really kind of stuck out and put shine on Morehouse HBCUs. Another thing is when Mackenzie Scott, she was former wife of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. She's a writer herself. She donated over $560 million to 23 HBCUs. She directly gave it to them, also through United Negro College Fund, through Thurgood Marshall Fund. And what's interesting I think about Scott, which I really didn't know, is that so she's a graduate of Princeton University, where she studied under Toni Morrison. And Toni Morrison was like her mentor. And she actually was like her research assistant on Toni Morrison's book, Jazz, that came out in 1992. And I'm thinking, like, if Toni Morrison's your mentor and if she's a Howard alum, chances y'all might have had a conversation somewhere down the line. I'm not saying she didn't know about HBCUs on her own, but you know. So I definitely think that also these donations that are going to HBCUs. So the Black Lives Matter movement, I think, has a lot of impact. The death of George Floyd, I think, has a lot of impact. I think all this investment that you see in scholarships, in research. At Bowie State, for instance, there's like a whole animation studio that is partnering with Bowie State and is going to bring first stop motion animation studio to an HBCU. And this was announced in January 2021. Howard announced also that it was going to build a research health disparities center that was going to look at chronic illnesses and biomedical research. And Howard University, Morehouse University, they're launching their Black Men's Research Institute. So there's a lot of research that are coming out of this pandemic that's coming after just the times that we live in. Black Lives Matter. Another thing that I think definitely pushed the resurgence is politics. And of course, our very own daughter of Howard, Vice President Kamala Harris. And what's so interesting about her is that not only did she go to an HBCU, but going to Howard is very much a part of her story. It's very much a part of her narrative. It's very much a part of who she is. And I think just shining that light on Howard really just sort of escalated HBCUs. Also, Senator Raphael Warnock, also a graduate of Morehouse, Stacey Abrams, all HBCUs. And then I think the last thing is high school athletes, these star athletes are choosing HBCUs. A lot of this is like in the wake of Black Lives Matter, feeling that they're going to a safe space. And so like Kerr Maker is at Howard. And then after him, others like sort of followed behind him. Daniel Ingram, he was a star quarterback at Ohio. And then with the intent, he was going to instead sign to University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, which is another HBCU. And so we keep seeing like star athletes, top of their game, going to HBCUs. And earlier on, HBCUs, this is that's the only place we could go. And then I think we were competing against a lack of resources, a lack of facilities. But the thing about it is that one-star player can really bring a lot of revenue to your athletics department. And Ohio State University did a study, and that one single football player, a star single football player, can bring $500,000 to your institution. And also in 2012, Norfolk State upset Missouri, and that pushed them, that spiked $220,000 into their revenue. It increased their revenue for 24%. So all of these events, all of these things, I think, are bringing a resurgence to HBCUs. And as Dr. Jones said, HBCUs, that's where we're educated the best.
Son, I've been thinking, and your mother and I think you should go to Stanford.
Actually, Dad, I don't want to go to Stanford anymore.
You don't?
It's a great school, and I'm really happy I was accepted. But when we went to Howard, I felt something special. From the moment we got there, everything about it made me feel proud and excited to be Black. Again, except Dad. Of course, I've seen Black kids protest before, but Howard is the only place I've ever seen Black kids on opposite sides of the same protest. I've never seen so many different kinds of Black people in one place. Rich kids, poor kids, middle class, Southern, Republican, Democrat. It was like the only thing that defined being Black at Howard was being proud that you are. And remember that one girl in the down bomber jacket who said I needed to stop staring at her or she'd punch me in the face? I think she might be my future wife. I'm sorry I was so close-minded, but I'm really happy that you took me to Howard.
Son, I'm really proud of you for making this decision and for also having the blind courage to think that you could get with that girl who wanted to punch you in the face.
That's how I knew she was the one.
So that was a scene from Blackish with our very own Anthony Anderson, alum of Howard University, you might add. But I think that's a real dilemma that actually a lot of students actually face today. Did they go to Stanford? Did they go to the Ivy League institution? Did they go to a Howard University? Do they go to a Hampton, a Spelman? So I think that's a real question. And the other thing is that he talks a little bit about the experience of sort of being Black, and I guess it's a Black experience. So is that enough anymore though? When you hear the demands from the Blackburn takeover, and when you see some of the concerns that the students have, is going to a Black university, is that enough? And so I'm really opening up the floor for questions. You may have questions for Dr. Jones about the history of HBCUs. You might have a question for Miss Erica England about the Blackburn takeover. So I have a question number one, and this is from Bridget. Is the Capstone Group a forerunner of Howard Alumni United, a companion group?
The Capstone Group, just for those of you who came in a little late, we were founded in 2018, and we were inspired by the student protest of 2018. So we're a galvanized body of students, staff, faculty, alumni, and community members. So it's not an alumni association, but that's why we work so well with Howard Alumni United, because of that. We seek to support those same stakeholders. And you'll hear about some of that support a little later. So hopefully that answers the question.
What's the response been from your classmates? What's the response been like from your instructors? How has it been now that you're back on campus, in the sense that, not protesting? Maybe still protesting, but.
I can speak to that. I don't know if Channing is on the line and can hear. I'm sure she could chime in as well. It's been a lot of positive feedback from what I can see. I think a lot of professors specifically are proud of what we did. We had a lot of faculty support. I think some of the things that we were discussing also affects faculty and their ability to be able to do their jobs well. So I was very appreciative of the support that we received. But the support has been amazing. There were students that really came forward and shared their stories that maybe weren't directly a part of the protest. One story specifically, there's a student at Howard who is undocumented, and she was talking about how since the protest started, she felt like she had more of a support system. And when the protest started, that was the first time she was receiving 3 meals a day. She was someone who was like living in a storage unit off campus because she didn't have the money as an undocumented student for housing or for rent. And she just felt like this was the first time as a Howard student that she really felt supported and had built community with us. And there was many more stories like hers that really inspired us and kept us going.
Outside of Howard campus, whether you're talking about your family, whether you're talking about like sort of the general public, what's that response been like?
That response has been very supportive as well. The DC community itself came and supported us. Many like Black-owned businesses and restaurants fed us, kept us going, donated to us, supported us, and they really showed up for us. And I think maybe in the past there has been some maybe friction between Howard University and the broader DC community. And it was good to see that this protest was something that like bridged that gap.
And what do you think, what are the next steps, would you say, for the Blackburn Takeover?
Students that were part of Blackburn, and even students that were just inspired by Blackburn and want to continue student organizing and student advocacy work, they're continuing to do that by joining orgs, doing mutual aid, making sure that they're being held more accountable to their other student peers. Just many ways, some of which is forthcoming.
I don't know if you can speak to like the demands themselves, and what do you think, what progress has been made, if any, on the demands themselves? Because when I look at like, I always felt like the demands, as y'all always said, were not demanding. I really did feel that way because I felt like having a town hall, like an in-person town hall, is not challenging. At least it didn't seem like it would be. And then also just having to sit down with the president and the board of trustees and come up with a feasible housing plan to sustain current students and future students. I mean, y'all are looking out for current students and future students. So what's the progress on that? Has that been?
Yes, you're right. I can't speak to directly what was agreed upon in our memorandum of understanding, but what I can say is what was agreed upon has a timeline. And we're going to do everything within our power to make sure that Howard administration is held accountable and that they just do right by us, so to speak. Just do right by us, do right by the students. And we're going to continue to, as you know, there was many other issues that our demands didn't even touch on. And we're gonna continue that fight to make sure that every student at Howard feels that it's a safe space. Every student at Howard wants to continue after they leave Howard to give to Howard because their experience was so great while they were there.
And so the other demand, I think it kind of impacts us all, impacts whether you're alumni, faculty, staff, or stakeholders in the community, is the removal of the affiliate trustees from the board of trustees. I mean, I look at just not only how it was done, but what has happened since. And sometimes I wonder, are our seats, our voices gone forever? I mean, is it a done deal? And So yeah, that's something that still I ruminate about, is those affiliate trustee seats not being there. And one of the things I have thought about, and maybe this is more of a statement, is if you did a campaign, right? So if you started and you had a campaign and you allowed for the elections to take place, and then you actually elected those candidates, why can't you seat those candidates? Isn't that sort of stopping the game in the middle of the process? Because the process already got started. But that's just my own, personal thoughts on that. But do you have any thoughts about just the affiliate trustees being reinstated? And is that still a possibility of them being reinstated?
I will say that as of right now, those seats have not been fully reinstated, and I hope that they will be.
Right, because I know the offer was given to students, I believe, to serve their term. I wasn't certain if those students had already graduated, because that term is only 1 year for students, and I believe it's 3 years for alumni and also for faculty. So I wasn't certain if the students had taken up that offer to go onto the board for a year.
I think it was up to them individually. I'm not sure where that stands as of now, but hopefully they will take up those positions, and because it's due to them.
Right, it certainly is. Are there any, or I believe that it certainly is as well. Dr. Jones, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Our HBCUs, this is a question that always happens. It's like, okay, well, there's a point in time where we could not attend PWIs, now we can. Are they still relevant? That's the question that I always come up. Are they still relevant?
More than ever. If you look at the stats on how we produce in STEM, education, law, social work, the white universities are scratching their head, wondering how do we graduate so many Black students, especially the types of Black students we graduate that aren't even admitted to white universities or qualify for their admissions. Yet we produce graduates that qualify for graduate school. And they're trying to study what we do, how we're doing it, because the demand for a diverse workforce is greater than ever, and they're trying to catch up. So they're recognizing that something is going on at a HBCU that they can't replicate. But still, I think it's interesting. All of these agencies and policymakers, they know HBCUs are still relevant in terms of what they can produce, but they're still underfunded. And so now the new call is, okay, you know what we can do. You're studying us for how we do it. Now, where's the money? Where's the redress for the systematic disenfranchisement? And so there's a number of lawsuits happening across the country, and people are studying how can they form coalitions to bring about lawsuits for redress, because they're reaping the benefits of HBCUs, but they're not supporting us.
Certainly. And there's something you said, I guess you made somewhat of a distinction between private schools and like the public schools. And I kind of wondered about private schools and public schools as it relates to infrastructure. Because I think a lot of times, so we think about, maybe lack of resources and infrastructure, but I've actually been to some HBCUs that just blew my mind. But then I thought, wait, they're part of a public system, or they're part of a state system.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why it's so amazing.
It's really interesting, especially when you're looking at Howard, because they're private. A lot of stuff is not transparent. Whereas in these public land grant institutions, they have to be transparent. It's state law. And that sometimes can be good because we don't have as much interference, but it also can be bad because we don't know sometimes how things are being managed, how finances are being allocated and distributed, and who's benefiting and who is being marginalized in the budgets. And I think that's one disadvantage of HBCUs sometimes being private. If you don't have good leadership, if you don't have people with good intentions, it can be a recipe for people to take advantage of that veil of privacy.
Right. And I also see that, with this like sort of $7 million in donations that have come in, and then we don't have affiliate trustees on the board. And it's kind of like, well,
We don't know. And
really
are the board meetings even public? I came from a public institution where they had to not only post the agenda for board meetings, but they had to post the minutes. They had witnesses there. And the public was invited for the first, half an hour. And they also had space on the agenda to speak. They had to put in a reservation and tell what they were going to talk about, but it was just a lot more open. Here, it's a lot more closed. We don't know what's being discussed. We don't know how decisions are being made as it pertains to different priorities. We're told what the priorities are, but we don't know what is actually being funded and how funds are being distributed. And that's very, troubling.
It is troubling indeed. I know that they said that they were going to start putting summaries of the board meetings, I guess, on the Board of Trustee website. I'm going to have to go check to see if those summaries are up there. So, but yeah, troubling indeed. I have another question for you, Dr. Jones. How can we get HBCUs to treat our students and faculty better? That's a good question.
I think, Miss England and her cohort are on the right track. We know from history that people who want to be treated better can't be passive. They have to make their voice heard. They have to form coalition. They have to speak up. And sometimes they have to find allies so that they can move forward. And so protest is a very strong strategy towards getting equity. It's not the only strategy. I think we need to have more conversation about governance and at different levels, how different types of people in different positions can help to ensure that there's equity. And so those conversations need to be had with students, they need to be had with faculty, but also we need to go and look at who is on the board, who determines accountability for the board. Has anybody actually reviewed how the board is held accountable? We have to start talking about accountability measures, training, we have to do reviews. How is the board performing? Are we not even talking about how Howard's performing or the president's performing? How is the board being held accountable for their performance?
That's a great question. I know that governance is one of the accreditation standards in middle states, but it's a good question. It's one thing to look at the institution and administration, but the Board of Trustees that's a whole nother different entity that, is often not.
And I think a group like the Capstone can start opening up those types of lines of questionings and put some pressure on Howard from the outside. We need more outside influence with people who are allies.
All right, thank you so much. I think when you start talking about next steps, there you go. You just gave us a plan for the Capstone Group that, we need to have more outside influence.
I'm just wondering, based on your questions, Dr. Jones, Erica, some people saw the protest as shining a light on, quote, the dark side of Howard or HBCUs. Like the protest brought, for some people, oh my goodness, you're embarrassing us. How do you put that in perspective? The activism that shines a light on poor management and all the other problems that HBCUs have. Yes, we know we're underfunded, but are there some other issues that we clearly have just not taken care of?
I can make a comment to that.
Yes, Eric.
I would say I don't think any of the students that were protesting were trying to embarrass the school in that way, because we're still students here and we chose to come here. We just want this. We want the administration, we want the board, we want Howard University to be held accountable to us. And when you repeatedly, approach administration through whatever channels that are available, and you're not getting responses or you're not getting any movement, protest is like a secondary or a third, even fourth option. There are many other ways to try to get the attention of higher ups, I'll say, than protest. But when you get to the point of protest, it's because things haven't changed. It's because we were, protesting in 2018, protesting in the 90s, protesting in 1989. So, and before. So if we're at the point of protest and things haven't changed even since then, it's due. I'll say, first of all. Second thing I will say as well is that all of us love Howard. And I don't think any of the students would put a lot on the line if they didn't think it was worth it. We want to see Howard be the biggest, the best, a bright, shining star, but that only can happen when you have all of Howard's constituency groups as a part of this conversation. I said many times during the protest, there's no way that you can make decisions for a group of people if you're not a part of that group of people. If you're not a student, you can't 100% speak to what student needs are. If you're not a faculty member, you can't 100% speak to what faculty needs are. If you're not an alumni, then how can you 100% speak to like what the needs and the wants or the concerns of the alumni are? And not just the alumni that sit on the board, but the alumni that are invested in alumni interests as well. Because just because you're an alumni on the board does not mean necessarily that you have the best interest of what the alumni population is thinking and speaking on. So that's what I'll say to that. We want equity. We wanted and still want visibility, accountability, and our voices.
Thank you, Erica.
There's something also to be said about respectability politics. We know that when people are embarrassed in these type of instances, they're embarrassed about how people outside of the institution see them. But why is there no embarrassment about how your students see you? Why is there no embarrassment about walking on campus every day knowing students aren't getting what they need? There should be some embarrassment there. But the whole idea of embarrassment only when white media or the white public knows that there's a problem is very telling.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Jones. Well said.
One last thing I will also add to that. I really believe that silence is violence. When you silence the voice of people that are hurting or that are having issues, to compare this to I guess I'll say an extreme comparison, it reminds me a lot of like rape culture, and especially within our community, that we keep it hush hush. We don't want to talk about it, keep family business in house. But a lot of times that lets the perpetrators go free. So we can't continue that notion of being silent, making sure we're not embarrassing ourselves or embarrassing the university if people are hurting and they're not being heard. So just an extreme comparison to the notion that we should be silent about it and not speak about it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great last words from each of you. Thank you.
Well, that's it for our event. We hope you've enjoyed it. If you'd like to become a member of the Capstone Group or make a donation to our scholarship fund, click on the link below. Take good care and enjoy.